Today I've come to talk about conflict that's ongoing in Sudan because out of all the conflicts ongoing right now, it's very apparent that when it comes to Black people, African people, etc., we barely get any coverage. And whether that's from other factors, I'm not here to talk about that today, even though it is important. I just want to raise awareness for what's going on. So how did this conflict start? The SAF has held power in the country for nearly a century and started using their power after gaining independence from the Anglo-Saxon Egyptian rule. In 1958, Ibrahim Abhoud overthrew civilian government and started a military rule. In 1969, Ghaffar Nimeri overthrows another short-lived democracy. And in 1985, Abdel al-Dahab overthrows and instills a democratic government, which was then overthrown by Omar al-Bashir, and he appoints himself new head of state. Omar al-Bashir had two groups, mainly. He created that he gave access to military power, the RSF and the SAF. RSF was led by a man going by the nickname of Hemeti. The SAF was led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. I'm so sorry if I am butchering the pronunciations. I am trying my best. And together took down the man who gave him power and gained control of Sudan. And this was because the country was going through protests where they said they didn't want to be in a military regime anymore. They wanted to have they wanted to live in a democratic country. And the RSF and the SAF overthrew him and then promised the protesters, the people, the civilians, that they would, help them out. Which, to put into context, a lot of the issues that have been going on in Sudan already, and a lot of the discriminatory attacks, a lot of raping, and just overall violence and evil was done by these same groups. And these same groups had been complicit when Omar al-Bashir would give out these orders. So the public was obviously hesitant, rightfully so, because on June 3rd, 2019, the RSF killed 100 people at a sit-in protest. And I think this is when a lot of media coverage started within the situation in Sudan. I remember in that time there was a lot of videos going around of young girls and women bravely protesting and using their right of protest to speak out against their government. And the RSF killed 100 people at a sit-in protest. The international community was then forced to step in, plus Arab allies. These countries included the United States, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, and also the African Union. They introduced a power-sharing agreement where the military would gain 21 months control, and then that would transition into protesters or civilians gaining 18 months control until talks of a democratic government or an election would be underway. But I think this was to kind of get a transactionary government and a way of trying to appease both sides. For the international community, the military would have to hand over power to civilians. However, the international community installs Burhan and Hemeti in power despite warning from civilians. Burhan as the chair and Hemeti as the vice chair, and installs a new prime minister, Hamdok Abdullah Hamdok. I hope I pronounced that right. And this did not last really long because of continuous regimes and staged coups just like the one in 2021, this caused Hamdok to resign. In January of 2022, Burhan became the de facto leader of Sudan with Hemeti as vice chair. Hemeti was not comfortable and wanted more power than being second in command, and used his large fortune to position himself as a statesman, better than Burhan even, and used his fortune to gain connections with powerful individuals in Russia, the People's Republic of China, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. After another year of protest, the US, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and the UK pressured Burhan and Hemeti and protesters to sign another deal. On December 5th of 2022, it was signed, promising civilians a civilian-led transitional government by April of 2023. Burhan and Hemeti disagreed on a key part of the deal, though, which was that the RSF would need to become a part of Burhan's army, limiting Hemeti's power. And wanted that to happen in 2 years, whereas Hemeti proposed 10, which caused a big rift between Burhan and Hemeti, leading to the current conflict between the two men. Soon after, hundreds of thousands of armed men were placed across the country. Burhan and his army have access to air force that's responsible for many of these casualties, and Hemeti's finances allowed him to arm more and more men on the ground. Ceasefires routinely were broken. Civilians feel and felt betrayed by the de facto leaders, but mostly felt betrayed by the international community for a lack of care and overall making any real change when it came to them. This is a really touching subject for me, and it's one of the main reasons why I wanted to make this video in the first place, which was despite the conflict and its means and how it started and stuff like that, the most important things about this conflict is the victims and the people that are affected that have no say in what's going on. Yeah, similar to Congo in Sudan, in the words of the UN, women and girls are bearing the brunt of this conflict. This is from a UN article called A Year of Suffering for Sudanese Girls, which was released on the 14th of April 2024. One woman states that Sudanese women and girls are paying a heavy price for this violence. 53% of those internally displaced are women and girls. 6.7 million people are at risk of gender-based violence. And reports of intimate partner violence, sexual exploitation, and abuse and trafficking in persons are widespread and continue to increase. Survivors report rarely being able to access services or report to authorities. These economic impacts of the conflict have further marginalized women, stripping them from livelihood opportunities and lead towards extreme measures and at risk of exploitation and abuse as they seek support from their families. Women and girls have been exposed to shocking levels of sexual violence, whether in conflict-affected areas, inside Sudan, on the move, or even in countries of asylum. A report of gender-based violence during the crisis, published at the end of 2023, UNHCR reported that women and girls inside Sudan were bearing the brunt of the consequences of the conflict. Many of those seeking asylum have experienced and witnessed harassment, abduction, rape, sexual assault, sexual exploitation, and other forms of violence during their journeys as well. This is Salma's story, and this story is really, really sad. It made me call a friend and just needed a moment to just think about how we are living in a world where this is happening and people are complacent and men still think there is no gender disparity issue. Because we might not see it in the world that we're living in with all these privileges masking. But when we reach a point in which conflict and starts to reveal to you how really, really harmful hate towards women spreads, especially in war. This is Salma's story. Salma, 26, lived with her husband and 3 children in El Geneina, capital of Sudan's West Darfur region. Their family house burned down after conflict engulfed the city. Spent over a week sheltering in abandoned buildings in neighborhoods before setting out for the border in Chad. Before reaching the border, Salma's husband was seized by a group of armed men, forcing her to continue without him. A short while later, 4 more armed men stopped the group, forcibly instructing Salma to put down the children she was carrying. "They beat me and I fell," Salma said. "I fainted and I don't know what they did to me. But when I opened my eyes, I saw my children next to me. And apart from the dress I was wearing, I had no more clothes on." The mother and one of her children were beaten by another man wielding a club on the Sudanese side of the border, who stole Salma's money, 2 mobile phones, and other belongings. Finally, they reached the river marking the frontier of Chad, where she carried her children to safety, waded back and forth through muddy, high-waisted water. While living in eastern Chad, Salma's situation remains bleak. Despite the medical attention, food assistance, and registering with UNHCR, she still suffers from back pain and abdominal pain following her attack. This is like a year. This is a year, like, just deep that for a second. "I have to work despite the pain, otherwise who will feed my children?" she asked. Before, I used to live in good conditions, but since my husband was taken, I have no one to help me. Our children should be in school for their future. I just want my children to go to school and be safe. People tell me my husband was killed, but I did not see it with my own eyes. I went on a call with my friend, and I just needed to wrap my head around how people use these opportunities of war to inflict sexual violence against women the most. And she gave me a very insightful view. Thank you, Kutsi. She talks about how in these rebel groups, there's reward systems for terrorism, that these types of acts are rewarded because it gives the men on top a power trip. They like seeing these things. They like hearing these statistics. They like inflicting violence upon women and children, those that are considered the purest in their communities, because they essentially want to affect the men of those communities. And it's like inflicting violence against women just to get a power trip because you're a disgusting person. It's just, I just can't wrap my brain around that. And, it also incentivizes men and builds further bad morals and behavior so that they keep doing this and think that this makes them better men in their army or whatever. She also talked about how a lot of young boys, when they're put in these situations, they break them down and then instill these ideologies so that, if you question and stuff like that, it's not really normalized. It's just really, really sad. And even making this video for me is really, really hard. But what's harder? Having to experience a life like Salma and many other women that have had experiences and even worse experiences such as her. Currently, as I'm recording this, I don't see any GoFundMes, or I haven't seen any places where I can fund and help Sudan, but I have found some Instagrams and TikToks that are talking about the Sudanese conflict, and hopefully through that you guys and me myself as well will find more access to ways in which we can really, really help these people. On Instagram, there is Sudanese shoutout, Sudanese_shoutout, no caps. And for Sudanese liberation, no spaces, no capitals. And Sudanese_American_physicians. On TikTok, there is Yasmin_am, Bisonblast, BSONBLAST, and that Gemini boy 13. All of these with no capitals, just typed as it is. I will put some of them in the description below, or just type it out if I can't get links. But yeah, I just really wanted to use my platform and my opportunity to really just uplift Sudanese voices, because I can tell that when it comes to Black bodies and Black wars, it's really, really not anyone's concern, because it's really, really inconvenient, because we know where all of this stems from, and we know how many people are actually benefiting from these disgusting acts of violence. And it's just really, really sad that innocent people have to bear the brunt of these disgusting people, these awful men who are having an ego trip and are basically destroying everything and everyone in their path because of it. It's just really disgusting, and it's even more disgusting how prevalent this is in world politics even today. I just hope that my video brought some awareness, helped you think a little bit, and maybe can encourage you to do better, speak out about this with your communities, with your families, and maybe also help these people out. Go on these pages, find GoFundMes, and donate to them, There's people on the ground, like For Sudanese Liberation, I think is it's a organization that helps feed people, because another thing that I haven't spoken about yet is the hunger crisis going on in Sudan right now. I think it's at least 8 million people are at risk of hunger, at risk of a hunger crisis in Sudan, at risk of dying of hunger. 7,000 young women aren't just at risk, they are dying. They are dying. because of the hunger crisis going on in Sudan. Because just like in Palestine, just like in places of conflict, your rights, your essential items are used against you, you know. This hunger is being created on purpose, as a military tactic. And I just find that really sad. I just hope that by bringing awareness, I spread this out there so that we become more mindful in creating a better world for our future. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day and you thank God for the day and have a lot of gratitude for the position that you are in right now. Love you guys. Bye. So this is me editing right now, and I just wanted to say that the figures for the humanitarian crisis, the hunger crisis that's ongoing in Sudan, is actually much worse than what the media is portraying. Currently, right now, I think it's about 9 million people at risk of dying of hunger. That's insane, guys. That's insane.